Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Hard Things Podcast. This is your host, Blaine Burgess, and I finally got my ears in so I can hear myself. Because that's my favorite thing is listening to my own voice. You can't tell I'm being facetious. Um, but yeah, today we have episode 83. And episode 83 is all about Gaius Julius Caesar, yet another figure that was assassinated. And I think as I come to a close on this little series of episodes, I think just in my lifetime, maybe early on, I had, a series of betrayals that I wasn't really prepared for, ready for, or, didn't really know how to deal with it. Didn't really know why this was happening. In my mind, my kind of naive mind, I think I was very lucky to grow up with many gifts. I had some intelligence and athletic ability, and you don't realize that despite other people's gifts that they have, they kind of look outward and see people who have these gifts, and consciously or unconsciously, most likely the latter, they just attack you. Like, it's just, we're here on earth, and when we're unconscious about our thoughts and desires and everything, then some pretty awful stuff happens. And human beings are just so complicated, and you could be conscious of, part of your psyche and completely unconscious and not ready to deal with some deeper parts that contain more and more evil. And I think as it happened to me early on in my life, I just said, like, hey, that part of me is going to get buried way down, and I just don't want to deal with that. I don't want to put that on other people. So becoming conscious is, kind of the result, but also it makes you grow up real fast. And the part you don't understand is you have to integrate that shadow. You can't just stuff it down and let it come forth later. But I'm very strong, so I held it down for a very long time before having it drawn out of me. And thankfully now I can look back and see the process of what was going on. But I think that's why I'm so fascinated by betrayal specifically, and assassination kind of being the ultimate betrayal. A lot of times it's not an enemy that ends your life or betrays you. It's honestly someone closer to you, someone who is dissatisfied with their own gifts and decides because of that they're going to diminish yours or take you down a peg. When I think the young version of me just wanted to find win-win situations. I've talked about that recently on the podcast is, I want to use my gifts to, rising tide raises all ships. And instead people would rather plunge into decay, rather than be, secondary, to something else, something greater, like a greater person who honestly maybe has suffered more than you understand already and doesn't need more lumped on them. That's another thing too, is like, I would see this quote. It's like, any blessing that you see was paid for. I think when I was younger, I definitely just kind of grew up with some intelligence and some athletic ability, but I will say my parents paid for that. They had lived their lives to that point and had created me. So it wasn't necessarily me that paid for it, but it was my parents. And then as you grow up, you start to pay for it. So any kind of wisdom or skill or whatever it may be is oftentimes paid for in blood, and the payment is probably inconvenient. And so you think you want something, but it's like, be careful what you wish for. So those are kind of the themes of today. And not only that, I'm excited we're going to connect this episode to the next one and reveal the character for the last episode of this little series. So yeah, in preparation for this, I mean, I did some research on the Roman Empire. It's kind of funny. As of late, people get kind of obsessed with the Roman Empire. It's like a meme that people talk about, but I think it is also a collective message of like, hey, we got this great thing here in the United States, unparalleled level of freedom on paper that people never really had before. And we can piss it away. And I think it's like a lot of that, it's a lot of kind of unconsciously dealing with the, potential consequences. And it's possible, in this case, Rome as an entity killed a lot of characters in history, and sometimes the karma from that, you kill someone like Julius Caesar, and it may not be right away, but I think it was roughly, if I'm doing the math right, I mean, it's about 500 years from when Caesar was killed. Yeah, I think it was 44 BC, and then the decline of the Roman Empire was like 476 AD. So if you add that, it's a little over 500 years. So it wasn't quick, but you take, maybe some of the sins of the United States. For example, last time we talked about Lincoln, it's like 1865. And because life happens faster, maybe it's not 500 years, maybe it's 300 or less, or 200. If that's the case, if it's 200 years, that's 2065 is the next kind of fall of the Roman Empire, so to speak. And that's most likely in my lifetime. And it's not something that I want to deal with. So I guess I personally, maybe I'm focusing on this betrayal to kind of tell me something. This is the universe telling me, hey, pay attention. Build yourself to be strong. Build yourself to deal with corruption and betrayal and different things, and be clever, and maybe we can just, you can find people to collaborate with to save the Union, just like someone like Lincoln did, get into politics and try my best to help the people and serve. And maybe not. Maybe I'll just become a chiropractor and practice in my own little corner of the world. But either way, I'll be ready for whatever comes. So I think that's like one thing I just immediately look at is, what are the consequences of our actions? Now, Caesar's rule came at the end of the Pax Romana, which is the kind of greatest peace that Rome ever knew. And it is kind of a theme in history of like, hard men make good times make soft men make hard times. And I think this is a little bit of a case of that. I watched Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. It's like a 1953 movie version. It was black and white. It was honestly, I don't know how. I'm so spoiled with like HD color movies and shows today that it was just kind of crazy to watch. um, I think it's really interesting to go back to that time because not only are they using Shakespeare's writing, like lines, but it's also just like the affect of men back then. Like you could see they're just different, even back in 53. So I think it's a good watch. I watched it on Tubi. Shout out Tubi, it's free. They also have the 1970 version on there, but the Shakespeare play is kind of idealized, shortened, curated, to make the point, but the core of it remains the same. So he had friends, quote unquote, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And the whole thing is, there's Cassius and there's Brutus and there's, a handful of other conspirators. And Cassius kind of knows, like, okay, Brutus is this honorable man, but as with any man, like, fallible to emotions. And Cassius is envious of Caesar, and Brutus is maybe like a quarter of that. So Cassius just kind of stokes the fire. And at one point, Mark Antony offers Caesar the crown, and they say they offered it to him thrice. So he offers it 3 times, he turns it down, but the people want him to be kind of like a king, a dictator. And he, is kind of just thrust into that position and expanding the Roman Empire, and like much of the people, trying to create change that we've covered so far in the series. Like a lot happened in a very short amount of time. And way back then, for all that to happen in one man's lifetime it's lightning fast. And people just kind of weren't ready. They're not ready for that kind of transformation. So, in a way, I think like the unconscious, like jealousy and dissatisfaction of these other men, drove them to kill Caesar. And so they stab him, and the aftermath is kind of crazy. Caesar didn't have an heir, which is, I read too, is like part of the reason why Shakespeare wrote Julius Caesar when and why he did was, at the time, the queen in England also didn't have an heir, so people were kind of anxious about it. So he was writing about it to kind of, I don't know, just call it to the forefront, try to make the unconscious conscious, which I think is great. That's like what great art does, is take something nobody wants to talk about and get them talking about it. So we can find, like, that's the thing humanity does best. If we bring it into our conscious mind, we can find a solution. That's what all the great minds do, is they take something terrible and they wrestle with it until it makes sense. So essentially, Caesar gets killed, doesn't have an heir, and then kind of war ensues. So all the people that killed Caesar fled the city of Rome. Mark Antony is still kind of high up. And basically the end of the movie is like Hitler, for example. Brutus and Cassius both end their own lives. I think Cassius has someone stab him, and then Brutus has someone hold a knife and runs into it, which I think is interesting. Talking about karma, it's like Cassius kind of carelessly had someone murder him and then caused that person to have that guilt or that, that karma, like that action on them. Whereas Brutus was honorable enough to kind of kill himself, but he didn't want to, like, it's a weird middle ground, right? Like, you don't want to just kill yourself, like samurai style. You don't also want someone else to have that blood on their hands. So you just like, hey, you just hold this. I'm just going to like run into it like it's an accident. It's kind of funny. Because in reality, the best course of action was probably not to kill Caesar and just try to work with the guy. And that could just be your struggle in life. And I think life is always, should be the highest priority. So they realize, like, they kill Caesar, and then it's just like, okay, well, the moment they killed Caesar, they killed themselves. And I think that's what happens when we, that's the way I've come to understand betrayal. Is like when you betray someone, you really are betraying yourself. Just like the guys that killed Cassius and Brutus, like, the guy that killed Cassius, like, now he's got the blood on his hands. And even the guy that killed Brutus is not fully, blameless. Like, he held the blade and he knew what Brutus was going to do. It wasn't like a surprise. So, yeah, like, I guess what it did was I went back in my mind to certain times when those betrayals kind of happen, and emotionally it hit me really hard, and I was just in pain to the point where I didn't kind of know what to do. Again, I didn't know how to deal with it. But I think what's really difficult is, so you can either position yourself as better than the other person, I feel bad for them and their life's gonna suck, and like you get kind of like negative about it, which is strange. And somehow it kind of makes you feel better, but it really doesn't, or you just realize like that person betrayed you for a reason that, if we're being honest, probably didn't really have that much to do with you, or like the way that you acted, or the way, you were just going about your life using your gifts the way they were, and this person is just having struggles of their own. It doesn't really have anything to do with you. And instead of trying to rise in their own power, they'd rather just cut somebody else down. And like I said, like Brutus could have tried to work with Caesar, and that could have been his struggle that kind of unlocked his glory, so to speak. But instead he chose the easy route. But the easy route doesn't get anything done for anyone. So in this life, like, we're all here to do the work that we're supposed to do. And if we supported each other in that work, even if while providing light resistance, like sometimes support is boosting and sometimes support is providing friction, because then the person will have to be more like resistance breeds creation, and assistance breeds like speed. And it's like there's a almost like a divine timing that things need to happen in, and we can either speed up or slow down that progress. And it's like you're born and you kind of, it's like a tug of war almost. You're born and you grab the rope, and then you can tug and pull and push on the rope, but really the rope just kind of stays still in the middle. And if anything, everyone's moving sideways through time while pulling on the rope. So in the middle, you kind of have maybe that flag that's tied in the middle, and we all want to keep the flag in the middle and just keep marching through time. But for some reason, we think it's going to be easier if we pull the flag towards our side as we move through time. But really, that doesn't change. Like, it's just, this is just the game, is moving that flag down the line. And I don't know, it took me a long time to realize that my skills and blessings were pulling the flag towards my side. And I just thought, you know, I don't know, this is just the way it's supposed to be. When you don't know, you know, you don't, there's no way to understand. So I think the lesson with all of this to me is when you feel like the flag is on your side, that's when you become charitable. That's when you seek to serve. Like when you have great power, you seek to serve other people, to bring the flag back to the middle and just leave the flag in the middle. And we can't let people pull the flag to the other side either. So if you remain powerful and have all your skills and everything, you can always pull it back to the middle. And what I've seen now is that's the point. Like the best you can really hope for. Like if you win, you lose. Like if someone else loses, you lose. And if you win, somebody else also wins. Like it can win, but you have to share that with them. And so what that looks like is a tie. It's like you win and then you give back. And if you lose, the other person loses too. So you got to like not lose, but also not win. And I think what was happening to Caesar was he was winning a lot. And instead of immediately, like he denied the crown when Antony presented it to him thrice, but he didn't give back. And what's funny is Mark Antony carries his body out in front of the people in the play. And then he reads Caesar's will. And I don't know how like real this is, but this is the Shakespeare version. Shakespeare has Caesar's will as giving like vineyards and orchards like back to the people for their recreation. It's like almost like establishing national parks and like giving them, I think, a certain amount of money per family and like all this stuff. And they were like, oh my God, they killed Caesar and Caesar has given us so much. Like, oh my God, I had no idea. And they immediately like regretted it. And then, kind of turned on Brutus and Cassius and the conspirators. So if Caesar had just done that before they killed him, the public would love him so much there would be no advantage to killing him. And that's the thing is like he's winning a bunch and you have to put the flag back to the middle. And it's hard to do because every time you put the flag back to the middle, you're afraid that they're going to pull it, And I think when I was younger and I had instances of betrayal, people call it naivety, but I think it's just how the world works. If you take all the spoils for yourself, and people are gonna fight you, and you got to be courageous enough to put the flag back in the middle, and brave enough that you might have to fight to not let them pull it further, and just know that it's the right thing to do. So that's kind of Julius Caesar in a nutshell. It ends with, the conspirators dying and young Octavian taking over. So Octavian was, I believe, Caesar's nephew, maybe even adopted nephew. And I think I've done a podcast on this before. So I'm just going to touch on it briefly since we're in about 24 minutes in. So it's very interesting the lessons that Octavian learned from Caesar. He learned what I was talking about and did it almost too much too soon, like it's like almost becomes like a little bit ingenuous at a certain point. So what he ended up doing was he took over for Caesar, but instead of taking all the power, like he kept all the powers, but he didn't take the name. And I think that's like one thing Caesar could have done. Like Caesar in his will gave back all the orchards and vineyards and stuff, but he could have also just denounced the name, like made somebody else consul, but retained all the powers. And I think that's an interesting thing. You take the responsibility, but kind of deny the glory in a way. And Octavian did it in a way that made a lot of sense. And he was able to stay in power. He invented the term princeps, first citizen. So he's like on the front lines with the people, but he's also like first in line, like if you see yourself fighting in the front line with the people, they're going to see you and ultimately respect you for that. They're going to be like, oh, well, this guy's fighting for us and he's considering us in his decisions, and he's, but then you can kind of still do your own thing and like what you're directed by, divine will to do, but then, it makes it easier to stomach when you kind of go against the people's will. If you kind of offer yourself on the front line, so to speak. So that's just an interesting thing. And I think if anything, the skillful way he handled that and kind of righted the wrongs of Caesar maybe, delayed the end of Rome. But speaking of that, you want to talk about the end of Rome and maybe something that actually did cause it. If he truly was the Son of God, the Roman Empire and the Jews killed Jesus Christ, JC, the big guy. So that's the big reveal, the character for the last episode here. So what's interesting is Caesar died 44 BC, about roughly 77 years later. Some accounts differ. Jesus died at the hands of the Romans. So it's almost like Octavian came in and bought some time, and then Tiberius took authority, and it degenerated. Like the natural state of the world is decay, and so great people can come in and maybe at the very least just like maybe not even build it up, but just like press pause on the decay. Like maybe Pax Romana was just delaying the inevitable. And like I was saying earlier with the tug of war, all you can really hope for is a tie. And then it's like, well, why am I even doing this if I can't win? And it's like, well, that tie is the best we can hope for, and that's what we got. Like that's like life. Life is just, we're here for a moment and then we're gone, and we got to pass it on to other people. And Octavian passed it to Tiberius, and the values, the people that were in power, the values that were being put forth, the people who were being put into power, the character of those people Pontius Pilate ended up sentencing Jesus to crucifixion. And that action, among, I'm sure, many others, if you're crucifying the Son of God and not listening to that, what else was going on too? It's just like a massive buildup of negative karma at which, over the next 400 years, just built and built and built until the society fell. I think it's interesting, maybe what started with the death of Caesar was prolonged by, it's like you see good men and evil men come and go, and the good ones press pause, and the evil ones increase decay. And that's really kind of a theme in a way of these assassinated leaders. They were making progress positively to bring it back to neutral in a way, like to get the flag back to the middle. And the flag being in the middle is just boring, I think, for people. In a way, it is this memento mori. I think that's one thing that's been popping up in the collective consciousness really recently is memento mori, and people are afraid of death. I know I definitely, as a kid, I was highly aware of it. And that fear can make you do things that kind of undo. I think at our core, the core of humanity, we want to leave this place better than we found it. But then the fear kind of takes those intentions and warps them and makes it hard to do the actions that are required. You might lose a couple extra years on your life to leave it better than you found it. And all these people we've been talking about in these episodes have sacrificed a lot, including their lives, to keep this thing afloat. And we keep this thing afloat for, next year a meteorite could smash into the earth and end it all. And, your sacrifice amounts to nothing. But I think what I've found is there's an immense amount of beauty on earth, and beauty ultimately is worth it. While we're here, we did something with it, even if it all kind of goes away. And so accepting death and accepting kind of the impermanence of things, getting a little Buddhist on you, it's kind of like the first thing you got to do. And once you realize that, all the sacrifice and everything becomes worth it. Because you just realize, this is it. And the time is now. And the universe will put you face to face with challenges, and you can either step up and, receive glory and then donate it back, or you can burn it all down. And kind of halfway it everywhere in between on that spectrum, I think, too. And you see that with all these characters. You can put them somewhere on that spectrum. Hitler being the one that tried to burn it down completely, and kind of Malcolm X with all the evil he experienced, kind of closer to midline, and then Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Lincoln, kind of on the other side of midline, trying to pull it back. And Caesar, we don't really know. His death ended the Pax Romana, so he was a little bit out of balance. Maybe he's closer to Malcolm X. But yeah, like I said, the last guy that we're going to go over is JC. And it's funny, I kind of did this in a way to catch up so I could keep making episodes every 2 weeks, but I accelerated these last few episodes because Sunday is Easter. And so Easter Sunday is when that 7th episode of the series is going to come out. And as I mentioned before, 7th episode, these episodes kind of correspond to chakras in a way. When I write them, I try to correspond it that way. And crown chakra, 7th episode, it's coming. It might be a crown of thorns, but no, I've as I've grown up, I think I've always known that these stories are kind of core and essential to humans and what we are. But it's kind of hard to swallow. It was a very bitter pill to swallow, and I definitely resisted it. But now that I see it, I can't really unsee it. I accept it. And that's not to say that you have to go get crucified. That's like, I think personally, I'll talk about next time, I don't think that was the answer. Because being alive, like I was saying with Brutus, the moment you kill Caesar, you kill yourself. And both of you being alive and struggling means at least there's a chance. Like the best of ability is availability. And as long as you are available for the work that needs to be done, no matter what mistakes you've made before to come to realizations that you need to do your work in the future, you know, that people say everything happens for a reason. I think everything happens because of our choices. And no matter how, like the story of Jesus and being forgiven for our sins is just, it's more about not that you did right or wrong. It's that maybe you did or did not participate. And really participation, availability is, it is the point. You know, we get hung up on what's good and what's evil. It's really, there's, you know, bad things that happen that provide resistance to good people that ultimately leads to, you know, example like Lincoln with the South. And the South secedes, and it gave Lincoln an opportunity to end slavery on paper. So we obviously didn't want to lose that many Americans in the Civil War, but it ended slavery on paper faster than anything else probably could have. And that's just part of the plan. And Jesus dying on the cross, another example, led to thousands of years of people trying to live in the image of Christ with that sacrifice. And I think it's an extreme version of sacrifice that makes tiny sacrifices seem manageable. And that's why Christianity has been so popular and relatively successful. And that's why it's lasted this long after his death. But also maybe not entirely necessary. Like being alive and being able to do your ministry or your work or whatever it is definitely the best outcome. So we'll talk more about that next time, in terms of, you know, what it all means and what the lessons are that can be drawn from it. I think there's some really important lessons and things I'm paying attention to. And if you look at it, all of these leaders are influencing me for whatever leadership that I will be called to in the future. And so their work lives on. And I hope I can transform it, add to it in some way, and then pass it on to the next people, and do so willingly, honorably, and in a balanced manner that can be sustained. So I hope you learned as much from this as I did. And I look forward to recording and posting the next episode on Easter in just a few days. So until then, see you guys later.